There is a movement in Mexico called the Zapatistas. One of their leaders is a revolutionary named Subcomandante Marcos. Marcos wrote a book that I read often. In the book, there is a passage called Reggae of the Butterflies. It speaks of butterflies that fly in the inner sea and that will not have a place to land because the sea has neither islands nor rocks. Marcos then uses the example of these butterflies to talk about rebellion. He explains, rebellion is like that butterfly that guides its flight towards the sea without islands or rocks. No to logic, no to prudence, no to immobility, no to conformity. And nothing, absolutely nothing, will be as marvelous as seeing the journey of that flight, to estimate the challenge that it represents, to feel like it begins to stir the wind and see how, with those airs, it is not the leaves of the trees that tremble, but the knees of the powerful, that until then naively thought that the butterflies died in the sea. I grew up in an upper middle class household in a rural town just outside Youngstown, Ohio. I was raised with the notion that the world had an order to it, that if you did the right things, then good things would happen to you, that you would be rewarded by believing in the system and operating within its rules. Although I was inundated with this idea, I saw another world taking shape before my eyes. Plant closings and rumors of layoffs were a part of everyday conversation. Factories moved overseas where cheap labor could be easily exploited. Youngstown, Ohio transformed from a steel town with a thriving middle class into a ghost town almost overnight. Meanwhile, in Mexico, the same policies that destroyed industry in Youngstown were resulting in the exploitation of Mexican workers. In response, the Zapatistas launched a rebellion with the stated purpose to protect the land of indigenous Mexicans and to push back against the concepts of these neoliberal policies. They stood in solidarity with workers all over the world who were being exploited by globalization and rejected the idea of workers being disposable objects, subject to the whims of technocrats on Wall Street and DC think tanks. Resistance in Youngstown was not like that in southern Mexico. Too often, workers looked not to themselves, but instead turned to their perceived leaders for answers. Their union bosses sold them out, and politicians cynically played on their fears to gain political power. No answers were provided, only cheap promises that were based on half-truths or outright lies. Many of these lies worked to provide simple explanations to complex issues and were rooted in racist and xenophobic rhetoric. I was not affected by any of this in a material sense. My father owned his own business and sent me off to college. There I learned about Latin American revolutionaries who had fought foreign domination over their country's resources for centuries. I learned how black labor had been exploited during slavery and was continuing to be exploited. I wanted to change things. I wanted to get underneath all the illusions and find answers. However, I still thought that could be accomplished by working within the system. After law school, I moved to Washington, D.C. to work with people in imminent danger of displacement from their homes. In D.C., the government works with developers to target entire zip codes to be demolished and redeveloped. The affordable housing in these neighborhoods is replaced with high-priced luxury apartments and condos. In order to justify displacing whole communities, the system works to demonize the people in them. It defines the individuals who make up these communities as disposable objects, the people who deserve what they get. It's okay to shut down the public school in their neighborhood because their children are incapable of learning. If they become homeless due to skyrocketing rents, that's not anyone's fault or responsibility. Their plight is simply a function of the market. My turning point came when I decided to rage against this form of thinking and exploitation. I now reject the notion that it is possible to achieve real change by operating within the rules of the system. I now have honest conversations with the people that I work for, the throwaway people. What I found is that their intellect and capacity to fight for true change is oozing out of them. I will work to break down the illusions that the system has built and expose the underlying lies that perpetuate it. My partners in this struggle will be the people who are most affected by it. They are my peers and mentors. Together we will build a horizontal army of leaders ready to take on this fight. We will build bridges between ethnicities and genders and not be divided. Together we will achieve a metamorphosis like those butterflies that refuse to die at sea. Once people realize that the answers to many of these issues lied within themselves, the racism and xenophobia that I witnessed as a child will vanish, and the knees of the powerful will certainly shake. We are all Zapatistas.